"Get out of this elevator, old man." The command exploded across the marble lobby just as the silver doors began to close. A frail elderly man stumbled backward, his worn shoe scraping the polished floor after a sharply dressed executive shoved him out of the crowded elevator. Everyone saw it. Nobody moved. Except one girl. "Don't touch him again." Her voice wasn't loud, but somehow it stopped the entire lobby. The young woman stepped between the old man and the elevator, gripping her cheap work bag with one hand while helping him regain his balance with the other. She had no expensive clothes, no powerful position, no idea who the elderly stranger really was. All she knew was that humiliating an old man because he looked poor was wrong. What she didn't know was that the man she had just defended, the man everyone else had treated like garbage, was the father of the billionaire CEO who owned the entire company. And upstairs, his son was waiting for him. The executive inside the elevator rolled his eyes. "This elevator is for senior management. People like him shouldn't even be in this building." Several employees stared at the floor. The old man quietly brushed dust from his faded jacket. "I only wanted to go upstairs," he said. The girl looked at him, then back at the executive. "So let him." A nervous silence followed. Someone whispered, "Does she know who she's talking to?" She didn't care. The executive was one of the company's most feared department directors. People had been fired for embarrassing him in meetings. And the girl, she was barely important enough to be noticed. It was her first week. She needed this job. Her mother needed medication. Her family needed the money. One complaint could destroy everything. The executive stepped forward. "You're new here, aren't you?" She swallowed. "Yes." "Then here's your first lesson. Stay out of things that don't concern you." The old man gently touched her arm. "It's okay, young lady." But she shook her head. "No, it is." Phones slowly appeared around the lobby. Employees were recording now. The executive's face hardened. "You're risking your job for a stranger." The girl looked at the elderly man beside her. Then she said the sentence that would soon reach the highest office in the entire corporation. "If keeping my job means watching someone humiliate an innocent old man, then maybe I don't deserve the job." The executive laughed. "You'll regret saying that." The elevator doors opened again. But before anyone could move, a sudden commotion erupted near the building entrance. Security guards straightened. Managers froze. And the company's billionaire CEO walked into the lobby surrounded by senior executives. The director immediately smiled. "Sir, good morning." But the CEO walked straight past him. Past the managers. Past everyone. His expression changed the instant he saw the elderly man standing beside the young girl. "Dad." The lobby went completely silent. The director's smile disappeared. The girl slowly turned toward the old man. And in that moment, she realized the stranger she had just risked her career to protect wasn't an ordinary visitor. He was the billionaire CEO's father. But what happened next shocked everyone even more. Before we continue, if you believe that a person's worth should never be measured by their clothes, job title, bank account, age, or social status, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Stories like this remind us that character is revealed most clearly when we think nobody powerful is watching. And sometimes one small act of kindness can change more lives than anyone could imagine. The billionaire CEO standing in the lobby was Ethan Harrison, 42 years old, founder and chief executive of Harrison Global Technologies, a company valued at more than $30 billion. Magazine covers called him a visionary. Investors called him relentless. Competitors called him impossible to defeat. But at that moment, none of those descriptions mattered. He was simply a son staring at his 74-year-old father. "Dad," Ethan repeated, his voice lower this time. "What happened?" The old man, Walter Harrison, gave a small smile. "Nothing worth making a scene over." The executive who had shoved him, Richard Cole, suddenly stepped out of the elevator. His confidence had evaporated. "Mr. Harrison, sir, there seems to have been a misunderstanding." Ethan looked at him. It was the kind of look that made an entire room instinctively become quieter. "A misunderstanding." Richard straightened his tie. "Yes, sir, I didn't realize." Walter interrupted. "That's exactly the problem." Richard stopped. Walter's voice remained calm. "You didn't realize who I was." Nobody moved. Emily Carter, the young woman who had defended Walter, felt her heartbeat pounding in her chest. Only minutes earlier, she had been certain Richard Cole would have her fired. Now she was beginning to understand that something much larger than her own job had just happened. Walter turned toward Richard. "If you had known I was Ethan's father, would you have treated me differently?" Richard opened his mouth. No answer came. Walter nodded slowly. "That tells me everything." Ethan's jaw tightened. His eyes moved toward the employees surrounding them. Who saw what happened? Nearly everyone had. Few wanted to admit it. For several uncomfortable seconds, nobody raised a hand. Then Emily did. "I did." Ethan turned toward her. Richard's eyes flashed a warning. Emily noticed. And for half a second, fear almost defeated her. She remembered the overdue electricity bill folded inside her purse. She remembered her mother sitting at their kitchen table 2 nights earlier, separating prescription bottles and quietly calculating which refill could wait another week. She remembered her younger brother, Noah, pretending he wasn't hungry so there would be enough dinner for everyone. She remembered telling them that getting hired at Harrison Global would change everything. And now, after only 4 days, she might lose that job. But then she remembered something else. Her father. Daniel Carter had been dead for 6 years, but Emily could still hear his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her. She had been 12 when he brought her to a grocery store one winter afternoon. Outside the entrance, they had seen an elderly veteran struggling to gather cans that had spilled from a torn shopping bag. People walked around him. Daniel stopped immediately. Emily had been impatient. "Dad, we're going to be late." He crouched to collect the cans. "Emily," he had said, "being late costs you a few minutes. Walking past somebody who needs help can cost you something inside yourself." At 12, she had rolled her eyes. At 24, she understood. Her father had never owned much, but he had left her rich in ways that didn't appear on bank statements. So Emily lowered her raised hand only after Ethan acknowledged her. "What did you see?" he asked. Emily inhaled. "Mr. Cole told him to leave the elevator. Your father said he was going upstairs. Mr. Cole said the elevator was for senior management." Richard immediately stepped forward. "That is not the full context." Ethan raised one hand. Richard stopped talking. Emily continued. Then Mr. Cole pushed him out. A murmur traveled through the lobby. Ethan's expression became unreadable. Did my father threaten anyone? No. Was he causing a disturbance? No. Did he refuse a security instruction? Not that I saw. Richard's face reddened. Sir, with respect, she has worked here for less than a week. Ethan glanced at Emily's employee badge. Emily Carter, Junior Operations Assistant. Temporary probationary status. One of the lowest-ranking employees in the entire building. Richard continued quickly. She doesn't understand the protocols here. Walter smiled faintly. She understood one protocol rather well. Richard looked at him. Walter said, "Human decency." Nobody laughed. Nobody dared. Ethan slowly turned toward his father. "Were you hurt?" "I'm fine. That wasn't my question." Walter's expression softened. "No, son, I'm not hurt." Ethan exhaled. Then he looked toward the head of corporate security. "Preserve every camera recording from this lobby and elevator corridor from the last hour." Richard visibly stiffened. "So, and collect any employee videos." One of the senior executives beside Ethan quietly pulled out his phone. Emily noticed something strange. Walter didn't look surprised. Not by the cameras. Not by the CEO's arrival. Not even by Ethan's order. Instead, the old man looked almost disappointed. As though what had happened had confirmed something he already suspected. Emily wouldn't understand why until later. 3 weeks earlier, Walter Harrison had been sitting alone in the kitchen of the modest house where Ethan had grown up. The house looked absurdly ordinary for the father of a billionaire. 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, a refrigerator covered in family photographs, a crack running along one corner of the kitchen tile that Walter had been promising to repair for 12 years. Ethan had offered him estates in California, Florida, Connecticut, even a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Walter rejected all of them. "This house already knows me," he always said. That evening, Ethan had visited for dinner. He arrived late. He usually arrived late. His phone rang 3 times before he finished the first bowl of Walter's homemade beef stew. On the 4th call, Walter took the phone from his son's hand and placed it face down on the table. Ethan stared at him. "Dad, you're eating. It could be important." Walter leaned back. "When you were 9 years old, you thought a broken bicycle chain was important." Ethan almost smiled. "When you were 16, you thought missing a football game was important." Walter continued. "When you were 28, you thought keeping your first company alive was important." "It was." "Yes, and now everything is important." Walter pointed toward the silent phone. "Which means nothing is." Ethan studied his father. Something had clearly been bothering him. "What's this about?" Walter hesitated. Then he reached into his cardigan pocket and removed 3 folded letters. Anonymous complaints. All from Harrison Global employees. One described a receptionist mocked because of her accent. Another described a janitor publicly berated for entering an executive hallway. The third came from a warehouse supervisor who claimed managers were being encouraged to judge employees based on appearances, connections, and status. Ethan read them twice. "Why were these sent to you?" "Because apparently people think the founder's father is easier to reach than the founder." Ethan frowned. "Our compliance department investigates complaints." Walter gave him a tired look. "Son, people are afraid of your compliance department. They're independent." On paper. That sentence stayed with Ethan. Walter had spent 35 years repairing heating systems before retirement. He had worked in apartment basements, schools, factories, and offices. He understood hierarchies differently from his son. Ethan saw organizational charts. Walter saw people. You built something enormous, Walter told him that night. I'm proud of you, but big buildings cast big shadows. Sometimes you have to walk into the shadow to see what's growing there. Ethan folded the letters. What are you suggesting? Walter smiled. Nothing yet. That should have warned him. The following week, Walter began visiting Harrison Global offices without announcing who he was. Not to spy. At least that was what he told Ethan later. He wanted to see how ordinary people were treated when nobody knew a billionaire was connected to them. At one branch, a security guard patiently helped him find the correct floor. At another, an intern carried a box for him without being asked. At a third, an executive assistant offered him coffee while he waited. Walter wrote down their names. But at headquarters, things felt different. Employees moved fast. People avoided eye contact. Assistants stepped aside when executives passed. The higher the floor number, Walter noticed, the less anyone seemed willing to speak freely. Then he reached Richard Cole's elevator. And everything changed. Back in the lobby, Ethan had no idea how deliberate his father's visit had been. Not yet. All right, Walter said suddenly, I've seen enough excitement for one morning. Ethan ignored him. He looked at Richard. Your access privileges are temporarily suspended pending review. Richard's face drained. Sir, I've been with this company for 11 years. I know. I oversee 400 employees. I know that too. You can't seriously be considering disciplinary action based on a 30-second incident. Ethan's eyes narrowed. I'm not considering anything yet. That's what the review is for. Richard looked toward Emily. She saw anger there. Not embarrassment. Not regret. Anger. And something about it made her uneasy. Ethan noticed the glance. So there is no confusion, he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. No employee who provides truthful information about this incident will face retaliation. His eyes remained on Richard. None. Richard forced a smile. Of course. Emily knew smiles like that. They never reached the eyes. Ethan walked his father toward the private elevator. Before entering, Walter turned. Emily. She blinked. He had read her badge. Yes, sir. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I do. She glanced around at the silent employees. I just did what anyone should have done. Walter looked across the lobby. His expression became sad. Yes, he said, that's what worries me. The private elevator doors closed. For several seconds, the lobby remained frozen. Then everyone began moving at once. Whispers, phones, messages, speculation. Emily walked toward her workstation on the 23rd floor with the uncomfortable sensation that hundreds of invisible eyes were following her. By the time she logged into her computer, she had 12 messages from coworkers she barely knew. Are you insane? I can't believe you confronted Cole. You're either getting fired or promoted. Did you really not know who the old guy was? One message came from a coworker named Madison Reed, another junior assistant hired 2 months earlier. Madison sat 3 desks away. Instead of messaging, she rolled her chair toward Emily. You okay? I think so. You're shaking. Emily looked at her hands. Madison was right. I might have just destroyed my career. Madison lowered her voice. You might have saved somebody else. Emily looked at her. Madison glanced toward Richard's empty glass office. You're not the first person he's treated like that. Emily's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Madison hesitated, then returned to her desk. Forget I said anything. That should have been the end of it. But the sentence stayed with Emily all morning. Upstairs on the 72nd floor, Ethan was hearing something even more disturbing. Walter sat across from his son in the CEO's private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Manhattan spreading beneath them. Walter hated the view. Not because it wasn't beautiful. Because, he once told Ethan, when you spend too much time looking down on a city, you can accidentally start looking down on the people in it. Ethan had laughed the first time. He wasn't laughing now. You planned this, Ethan said. Walter stirred his coffee. I planned to visit. In old clothes. These are my clothes. You own better clothes. So do you. That tie looks exhausted. Dad. Walter smiled. Then the smile disappeared. I wanted to know whether those letters were exaggerating. And they were. Ethan walked toward the window. Richard Cole has some of the strongest performance numbers in the company. That doesn't answer the question. What question? Is he a good leader? Ethan turned. He delivers. So does a vending machine. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Walter continued. You know what I saw downstairs. I know what happened to you. No, you know the dramatic part. Walter leaned forward. I saw employees recognize something wrong and choose silence. Ethan said nothing. I saw people afraid to defend an old man because they thought the person mistreating him could damage their careers. Walter pointed toward the floor beneath them. That kind of fear doesn't appear in one morning, Ethan. Somebody teaches it. Ethan looked at the anonymous letters again. For the first time, they seemed heavier. Walter continued. And that young woman. Emily. Yes, Emily Carter. Walter smiled. She was terrified. She didn't look terrified. That's courage. Ethan looked at his father. Walter said, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's deciding something else matters more. Those words took Ethan somewhere he had avoided for years. He was 16 again, standing in a freezing garage beside his father. His mother, Margaret, was inside undergoing another difficult round of treatment for an illness that had already consumed most of the family's savings. Ethan had discovered an envelope on Walter's workbench. Inside were college tuition documents, and a notice showing Walter had borrowed against the house. You did this for me, teenage Ethan had asked. Walter continued, repairing a furnace motor. You're going to college. I can work. You're going to college. What if Mom needs the money? Walter stopped. For a moment, his father looked older than Ethan had ever seen him. Your mother and I agreed on one thing a long time ago. Whatever happens to us, you keep moving forward. Margaret died the following year. Ethan almost abandoned school. Walter wouldn't allow it. Years later, when Ethan founded the small software company that eventually became Harrison Global, Walter mortgaged the house a second time to help him cover payroll. Nobody knew. The financial magazines wrote that Ethan Harrison was self-made. Ethan hated that phrase. There had been nothing self-made about him. Behind every public victory stood a man who had quietly sacrificed something. That was why seeing his father pushed out of an elevator had struck deeper than humiliation. It felt like an insult to every invisible sacrifice that had built the company. Ethan picked up his phone. Get Helen Park. Walter raised an eyebrow. Helen Park was Harrison Global's chief ethics and compliance officer. Ethan added, and I want an independent review, not just of today, of Richard's department. Complaints, turnover, exit interviews, promotions, terminations, everything. Walter nodded once. And Ethan? Yes. Don't investigate, only Richard. Ethan frowned. Walter looked toward the city. Investigate the system that taught everyone else to stay quiet. By lunchtime, Richard Cole had learned enough to understand that his situation was far worse than he had expected. His access card no longer opened his office. His company accounts were restricted. Compliance investigators were collecting records. And employees who had ignored his behavior for years were suddenly remembering everything. Richard had built his career on understanding power. He knew whom to praise, whom to pressure, whom to ignore, and whom nobody would believe. His mistake that morning had not been cruelty. At least that wasn't how he saw it. His mistake had been choosing the wrong victim. That distinction was exactly why he still didn't understand what was happening. He found Emily in the cafeteria at 1:17 p.m. She was eating half a turkey sandwich while checking a text message from her mother. Don't worry about me, focus on work, proud of you. Richard sat across from her without invitation. Emily immediately put down her phone. You shouldn't be talking to me. I'm not threatening you. I didn't say you were. He smiled. You're smart. Emily said nothing. You've had an exciting first week. I'd prefer a boring one. Richard leaned back. Do you know how many people want jobs here? Yes. Thousands for every junior opening. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Richard continued casually. You're still on probation. Mr. Harrison said there would be no retaliation. Of course. Richard smiled again. But companies restructure, budgets change, positions disappear, performance gets evaluated. Emily stared at him. There it was. Not a threat. Something carefully built to look like one without becoming one. Richard leaned forward. All I'm saying is that memories are complicated, crowded lobby, stressful morning. You may have interpreted things more dramatically than they happened. Emily remembered her father crouching in the snow outside the grocery store. Walking past someone who needs help can cost you something inside yourself. She stood. My memory is fine. Richard's smile vanished. You really think the Harrison family cares about you? Emily picked up her tray. I didn't defend Mr. Harrison because I thought his family would care. That answer irritated him more than anything else she could have said. Because Richard understood transactions. He did not understand principles. Emily walked away. She didn't see Madison standing near the cafeteria entrance. And she didn't notice Madison's phone recording the last 17 seconds of the conversation. That evening, Emily returned home later than usual. Home was a second-floor apartment in Queens with a radiator that clanged at night and a kitchen window facing a brick wall. Her mother, Susan, sat at the table sorting mail. Noah, 17, was doing homework on an agging laptop patched with black tape. Susan looked up. How was work? Emily removed her shoes. Complicated. Noah grinned. You meet the billionaire yet? Emily stopped. Susan noticed. What happened? 20 minutes later, neither of them was smiling. You confronted a director, Susan asked. He pushed an old man. The CEO's father. I didn't know that part. Noah leaned back. That makes it way cooler. Susan gave him a look. It does not. It kind of does. Emily laughed despite herself. Then Susan reached across the table. Are you afraid? Emily nodded. Yes. Susan squeezed her hand. Then why did you do it? Emily looked toward the photograph hanging beside the refrigerator. Her father, Daniel Carter, smiling in a faded Yankees cap. You know why. Susan followed her gaze. Her eyes softened. He would have done the same thing. I know. He also would have worried himself sick about you afterward. Emily laughed quietly. I know that too. Susan's expression became serious. Your father spent his whole life believing kindness mattered, even when nobody rewarded it. Emily looked down. Susan added, don't start measuring whether you did the right thing by what happens next. That sentence would become important sooner than either of them expected. The next morning, Emily arrived at Harrison Global to find her access card rejected. Red light. She tried again. Red. Her breath stopped. So this was it. Richard had been right. A security officer approached. Ms. Carter. Yes. Please come with me. Employees passing through the lobby began staring. Emily followed him toward a private elevator. Her palms were sweating. The elevator climbed. 40 floors. 50. 60. 72. The executive floor. The doors opened. Helen Park stood waiting. Emily, good morning. Emily tried to read her expression. Am I being fired? Helen blinked. No. Emily exhaled so quickly Helen almost smiled. Your badge was temporarily reassigned because you've been requested upstairs. By who? A familiar voice came from the office beyond her. Me. Walter Harrison stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked entirely different. Not because of his clothes, they were still simple, but because now Emily understood how people reacted to him. Assistants straightened. Executives greeted him by name. Doors opened before he touched them. He handed Emily a cup. I owe you one. You really don't. Still arguing with old men. Emily smiled nervously. I guess so. Walter led her into Ethan's office. Ethan stood from behind his desk. Ms. Carter. Mr. Harrison. Emily is fine, Walter said. Ethan looked at his father. She gets to decide that. Emily almost smiled. Emily is fine. Ethan motioned toward a chair. I wanted to thank you personally. You already did. No, yesterday I reacted as a son. He sat opposite her. Today I'm speaking as CEO. Emily became nervous again. Ethan continued. Compliance reviewed security footage. Your description was accurate. Emily nodded. They also received another recording. Emily looked confused. Helen placed a tablet on the table. The cafeteria recording played. Richard's voice filled the room. Companies restructure, budgets change, positions disappear. Emily's face went pale. I didn't record that. We know, Helen said. Another employee did. Ethan stopped the video. That employee also submitted a statement describing repeated intimidation. Emily thought immediately of Madison. She said nothing. Helen continued. Once we opened the reporting channel yesterday, we received 43 complaints involving Mr. Cole's division. Emily stared at her. 43. By midnight. Walter looked toward Ethan. There was no triumph on his face. Only sadness. Ethan said, some are minor, some are serious, all require investigation. Emily realized what Walter had meant. Somebody teaches fear. Richard Cole had not become powerful because nobody knew what he was like. He had become powerful because too many people believed speaking was more dangerous than silence. Ethan folded his hands. There's something else. Emily waited. Your personnel file says you were assigned to temporary operations support. Yes. Your supervisor's evaluation from your first 4 days describes you as punctual, organized, and unusually good at identifying process problems. Emily blinked. That seems like a lot to get from 4 days. Walter chuckled. Ethan almost smiled. We're not promoting you because you defended my father. Emily felt oddly relieved. That would be uncomfortable. Extremely. But I am removing your probationary status early. Your position will be protected during the investigation, and Helen's office wants to interview you about the reporting culture you observed as a new employee. Emily looked between them. Why me? Walter answered. Because sometimes a newcomer notices what everyone else has learned not to see. For the next 2 weeks, Harrison Global began changing. Not dramatically at first. Real change rarely arrives with dramatic music. It arrived in emails, confidential interviews, policy reviews, meetings that ran late, executives suddenly being asked questions nobody had asked them before. Why were turnover rates twice as high in Richard Cole's division? Why had 12 exit interviews mentioned fear-based management without triggering investigation? Why were anonymous complaints routinely forwarded to managers accused in those same complaints? Why had high-performing directors been evaluated almost entirely on revenue and productivity, while employee treatment received little weight? The answers embarrassed Ethan. Some failures belonged to Richard. Others belonged to the company Ethan himself had built. That was harder to accept. One night, long after most employees had gone home, Ethan sat alone in the executive conference room, surrounded by reports. Walter entered without knocking. You look terrible. Thank you. You're welcome. Ethan slid one report across the table. 5 years. Walter sat. We had warning signs for 5 years. Yes. I didn't see them. Walter read the first page. No. I should have. Yes. Ethan looked up sharply. Most people around him would have said it wasn't his fault. Walter wasn't most people. You could try being comforting. I raised you. My job description is broader. Ethan leaned back. How did I miss this? Walter thought for a moment. Success gets loud. Ethan waited. When your company was 6 people in a rented office, you knew who was struggling because you sat 6 feet away from them. Walter tapped the report. Now you have 27,000 employees. Everything reaches you as numbers. Retention percentage. Engagement score. Productivity index. Walter shook his head. Numbers are useful, but nobody cries in percentages. That sentence hit Ethan harder than Walter intended. He remembered his mother. Near the end of her life, doctors had described survival rates. Percentages. Probabilities. Statistics. But Walter had sat beside her hospital bed every day, refusing to let numbers become the only story. Ethan closed the report. What would you do? Walter laughed. You're asking a retired HVAC technician how to run a multinational corporation. I'm asking my father how to treat people. Walter became quiet. That answer hasn't changed since you were 10. Ethan smiled faintly. Treat the person with the least power in the room as if they have the most. Why? Because the person with the most power doesn't need your character. The person with the least does. The next morning, Ethan cancelled 3 investor meetings. By noon, he had announced the largest workplace culture review in Harrison Global's history. Executive bonuses would now include employee retention and verified leadership quality metrics. Anonymous complaints would bypass local management. An independent ombudsman office would report directly to the board. Retaliation investigations would receive automatic priority. And once every quarter, senior executives would spend a full workday shadowing frontline employees. Wall Street analysts complained that Ethan was overreacting to a viral lobby incident. He didn't care. Because the lobby video had gone viral. An employee had uploaded it anonymously. Within 48 hours, millions had watched Emily step between Richard and Walter. News programs debated workplace hierarchy. Commentators praised Emily. Others accused Harrison Global of staging the incident for publicity. Emily hated all of it. Strangers found her social media accounts. Reporters waited outside the building. One morning, someone sent flowers to her mother's apartment. Another person offered Emily money for an exclusive interview. She rejected everything. "I'm not a hero," she told Madison. They were eating lunch together. Madison smiled. "Heroes always say that. Please never call me that again." "Fine." Madison took a bite of salad. "Terrifying elevator vigilante." Emily laughed. Then she became serious. "You sent the cafeteria video, didn't you?" Madison froze. Emily watched her. "You don't have to answer." Madison slowly put down her fork. "Yes." "Why?" Madison stared at the table. "Because of Jenna." "Who's Jenna?" "My old supervisor." Madison took a breath. Last year, Richard screamed at her in front of 20 people because a presentation had a formatting mistake. She reported him. Emily listened. 2 weeks later, she was transferred. 3 months after that, her position was eliminated. Was it retaliation? "I don't know." Madison's voice became quieter. But everybody thought it was. Emily understood. So nobody reported him anymore. Madison nodded. "Yesterday, when I saw you stand up to him, I felt ashamed." "Ashamed?" "Because I knew exactly what he was like." She looked at Emily. "And I had learned to pretend I didn't." Emily reached across the table. "You recorded him. After you did the hard part." "No." Emily shook her head. "We both did a part." That conversation changed Madison. And eventually, it changed far more people. As complaints were investigated, employees began speaking openly. Not recklessly. Not vindictively. Honestly. Some complaints against Richard were unsubstantiated. Others were confirmed. He had manipulated performance reviews, threatened employees indirectly, mocked junior staff, taken credit for subordinates' work, discouraged internal reporting, and created a culture where fear produced short-term results at long-term human cost. After an independent investigation, Richard Cole was terminated. But Ethan refused to make him the convenient villain of the entire story. At a company-wide meeting, streamed to Harrison Global offices around the world, Ethan stood on stage without notes. Emily watched from the back row beside Madison. Walter sat somewhere near the middle, deliberately refusing the reserved front row seat. Ethan began simply. 3 weeks ago, my father entered our headquarters and was treated disrespectfully by one of our executives. The room was silent. Most of you know what happened next. A photograph of the lobby appeared behind him. Emily immediately wanted to disappear under her chair. Ethan continued. The easiest version of this story is that one bad executive behaved badly, one courageous employee intervened, and leadership corrected the problem. He paused. That version is comforting. Another pause. It is also incomplete. Emily leaned forward. Ethan looked directly toward the camera. Richard Cole is responsible for his behavior, but I am responsible for the company in which that behavior was allowed to continue. The auditorium shifted. Executives exchanged glances. CEOs rarely said sentences like that publicly. Ethan continued. We rewarded results aggressively. We did not evaluate how those results were achieved aggressively enough. He stepped away from the podium. We told employees to speak up, but some of our systems made speaking up feel dangerous. Walter watched quietly. We said every employee mattered, but status influenced whose concerns received attention. Ethan looked across the auditorium. That failure belongs to leadership. Something changed in the room. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But attention. Real attention. Ethan continued. My father once told me that the true culture of an organization is not written on a wall. It is revealed in what people believe they can do to someone who cannot fight back. Walter lowered his eyes. Emily felt chills. The morning my father was pushed from that elevator, dozens of people witnessed it. Ethan paused. One person intervened. Every face turned toward Emily. She wished they wouldn't. Ethan smiled slightly. Emily Carter had been employed here for 4 days. Scattered applause began. Emily shook her head. Then the applause grew. Hundreds stood. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Madison squeezed her hand. Ethan waited until the room settled. I spoke to Emily before this meeting. She asked me not to turn her into a symbol. A few people laughed softly. So naturally, I'm going to respect that. Emily smiled. This is not a story about one extraordinary person. Ethan looked around. It is a challenge to ordinary people. The room became silent again. What do you do when there is no camera? What do you do when kindness is inconvenient? What do you do when the person being mistreated cannot help your career? What do you do when the person causing harm can damage it? He let the questions hang. Those answers define us more accurately than any corporate values statement ever will. Walter smiled. For the first time since the elevator incident, Ethan saw pride in his father's face, without disappointment beside it. 6 months passed. Emily's life did not transform into a fairy tale. She did not become a millionaire overnight. She did not receive a mansion. She did not suddenly become vice president because she had performed one courageous act. That mattered because Walter insisted on it. She deserves opportunity, he told Ethan, not charity disguised as opportunity. Emily remained at Harrison Global. She completed training. She became a full operations analyst. Then she joined a cross-functional team, redesigning the company's employee reporting systems. Her salary increased enough that Susan no longer had to choose which bill could wait. Noah received a scholarship to a state university. Emily paid off the oldest medical debt first. On the day she made the final payment, she sat alone in her car and cried for 10 minutes. Not because she had become wealthy. Because for the first time in years, the future felt larger than the next overdue notice. Walter remained part of her life. Not constantly. He had no interest in becoming some mysterious billionaire benefactor. Sometimes he appeared in the cafeteria. Sometimes he called Emily to ask whether the new reporting system actually worked. Once he invited Emily and her family to his small house for dinner. Susan nearly refused when she realized who Ethan would also be there. "I cannot eat spaghetti with a billionaire," she told Emily. "Why? I don't have billionaire conversation." You complain about electricity prices. Everybody has that conversation. The dinner was surprisingly ordinary. Walter cooked. Ethan arrived late. Walter complained. Noah asked Ethan what his first company had been worth. "Almost nothing," Ethan answered. Walter corrected him. "Less than nothing, he owed me money." Everyone laughed. After dinner, Emily noticed an old photograph on the mantel. Young Ethan. His mother Margaret. Walter, decades younger, standing beside an old pickup truck. "You kept the truck?" Emily asked. Walter followed her gaze. "For 18 years. Why?" "It ran." Ethan groaned from across the room. "It barely ran." Walter ignored him. Emily smiled. Then she noticed something else beside the photograph. A small brass plaque. Harrison Heating and Repair. Walter picked it up. "My old business. You owned a company. If you count one truck and one employee." "Who was the employee?" "Me." Emily laughed. Walter turned the plaque over in his hands. "One winter, when Ethan was about 8, I got a call from an elderly woman whose furnace had stopped working. Ethan looked over. "I remember that." Walter nodded. "She couldn't afford the repair." Emily already knew where the story was going. "You fixed it anyway." Walter shrugged. "It was 12 degrees outside." "And she paid you later?" "No." Ethan smiled. "She paid him with apple pies. 3 excellent apple pies." Walter looked at Emily. "Ethan asked me why I worked half a day for free." "What did you tell him?" Walter smiled. "That some jobs pay you in money, and some pay you in knowing what kind of person you are." Emily became quiet. Those words reminded her of her father so strongly that for a moment she had to look away. Walter noticed. "Your father." She nodded. "You talk about him like I would have liked him." "You would have." "Then I'm sorry I didn't get the chance." Emily looked down at her hands. "He used to say something similar." Walter waited. "He said you should be careful what you walk past. Eventually, your heart learns that walking past it is normal." Walter stared at her. Then he smiled. "That explains the elevator." "Probably." Across the room, Ethan heard the exchange. He said nothing. But years later, he would repeat Daniel Carter's sentence during leadership training. Always with Emily's permission. Always giving her father credit. A year after the incident, Harrison Global published its first independently audited workplace culture report. Complaint resolution times improved. Employee trust scores increased. Turnover decreased in several divisions. But Ethan refused to call the work finished. Every quarterly leadership meeting began with one question. What are people afraid to tell us? It became known unofficially as Walter's question. Richard Cole disappeared from public attention. Months later, Emily unexpectedly saw him again. She was leaving a pharmacy near her mother's apartment when she noticed a familiar man standing beside the parking lot. Richard looked different. No tailored suit. No executive badge. No crowd waiting for his approval. For a moment, Emily considered walking away. Then Richard recognized her. "Emily. Mr. Cole." He laughed bitterly. "Not anymore." An uncomfortable silence followed. Emily didn't know what to say. Finally, Richard spoke. "I hated you." She blinked. For a while. He looked toward the street. "I told myself you ruined my career." Emily said nothing. But then I read the investigation report. His jaw tightened. Every complaint. He looked at her. "Do you know what the worst part was?" "No." "I remembered almost all of them." Emily felt a chill. Richard continued. "I remembered the faces, the meetings, the things I said." He shook his head. "I just hadn't considered them important." For the first time, Emily saw something in him she had never seen before. Shame. Not humiliation from losing status. Actual shame. "My father was like me," Richard said unexpectedly. Emily waited. "He believed respect moved upward. You respected whoever could help you. Everybody below you was supposed to earn whatever was left." Richard stared toward the pharmacy window. "I spent 20 years thinking that was how successful people behaved." Emily thought of Walter, of Daniel, of Ethan. "Do you still think that?" Richard met her eyes. "No." That single word sounded difficult. Emily nodded. "I hope things get better for you." Richard looked surprised. "You mean that?" "Yes." "After everything." Emily adjusted the bag in her hand. "Forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was okay." Richard stared at her. "It just means I don't want to become cruel because somebody was cruel to me." Then she walked away. Richard stood there for a long time. Emily never knew exactly what became of him. And maybe that was appropriate. Not every redemption needed an audience. 2 years after the elevator incident, Walter's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic happened at first. He walked slower, rested more, forgot small things. Ethan started visiting every Sunday. Not his assistant, not his driver. Ethan. Sometimes they talked about business. Usually Walter changed the subject. One afternoon, Emily visited and found father and son sitting on the porch. Walter was wrapped in a blanket despite the warm weather. Ethan was repairing an old wooden step. "Badly." Walter pointed at him. $30 billion CEO. He looked at Emily. "Can't use a level." Ethan sighed. "It's level. It's emotionally level." Emily laughed. She sat beside Walter. For a while, they watched Ethan struggle. Then Walter spoke quietly. "You know what bothered me most about that elevator?" Emily glanced at him. "Being pushed." "No." "Richard." "No." Walter looked toward the street. It was everyone watching. Emily remembered. The lowered eyes. The silence. The fear. Walter continued. "I spent my life believing most people are good." "Do you still?" "Yes." He answered immediately. "That morning didn't change my mind." Emily was surprised. "Why not?" Walter smiled. "Because you were there." Emily looked down. One person is how things start." He nodded toward Ethan. "One person starts a company." Then toward Emily. One person speaks up. Toward the houses around them. One person raises a child differently. He leaned back. Everybody wants to know whether the world is getting better or worse. That question is too big. What should we ask? Walter looked at her. Is the part of the world I can reach getting better because I'm in it? Emily never forgot that. Neither did Ethan. Walter died peacefully the following spring with Ethan beside him. At the memorial service, hundreds attended. Executives, employees, neighbors, old customers from Walter's repair business. People Ethan had never met. One elderly woman approached him carrying a photograph. It showed Walter standing beside an ancient furnace. "Your father fixed my heat 34 years ago," she said. Ethan smiled through tears. "Did you pay him in apple pies?" The woman stared. "How did you know?" Ethan laughed. For the first time that day, grief loosened its grip. Emily stood near the back with Susan and Noah. She watched people tell stories. None involved money. Nobody talked about Walter's investments. Nobody mentioned luxury. They remembered rides he had given. Repairs he refused payment for. Phone calls returned. Promises kept. People defended when nobody else noticed. That was when Emily finally understood the hidden meaning of the elevator incident. Everyone had assumed the shocking part was that Richard had unknowingly mistreated the billionaire CEO's father. But Walter would have hated that interpretation, because it suggested the cruelty became worse once his identity was revealed. It didn't. Pushing an anonymous old man from an elevator was already wrong. The billions changed nothing. The powerful son changed nothing. The famous surname changed nothing. Walter deserved dignity before anyone knew his name. That had been the entire point. 3 months after the memorial, Harrison Global officially renamed its leadership development program. The Walter Harrison Standard. Ethan objected at first. His father would have hated having his name everywhere. Emily suggested a compromise. No giant portrait. No marble statue. No grand slogan about greatness. Instead, every new manager received a small card. On one side were 6 words. How do you treat the powerless? On the other, who are you when nobody important is watching? The card became one of the company's most recognizable traditions. Years passed. Emily rose gradually through Harrison Global. Operations analyst, program manager, director, then vice president of organizational integrity. Every promotion came after years of work. Every time someone suggested that her career had begun because she defended the CEO's father, she corrected them. My career began because somebody gave me an entry-level job. Then she smiled. The elevator just revealed what kind of company we still needed to become. One autumn morning, nearly 12 years after that first encounter, Emily walked into Harrison Global headquarters. The lobby had changed. New security system. Renovated reception area. Different furniture. But the elevators were the same. Silver doors. Soft chime. Employees hurrying to meetings. Emily stepped inside with 6 others. Just before the doors closed, a maintenance worker carrying a heavy toolbox hurried toward them. A young executive near the control panel glanced at his watch. He sighed. For one dangerous second, Emily saw the old world returning. The impatience. The hierarchy. The invisible calculation about whose time mattered more. Then something happened. The executive reached between the closing doors. They reopened. "Come on," he called. The maintenance worker stepped inside. "Thanks." "No problem." The doors closed. Nobody applauded. Nobody recorded it. Nobody knew Emily was watching. Nobody needed to. Emily smiled. That was the part Walter would have loved. When the elevator reached her floor, she stepped out. Behind her, the young executive and maintenance worker were discussing baseball. Different positions, different salaries, same elevator, same dignity. Emily walked toward her office. On the wall beside the entrance hung a small brass plaque. Not large, not dramatic. Most visitors barely noticed it. It carried a sentence attributed to Walter Harrison. A person's value does not increase when you discover who they know. Emily touched the edge of the plaque as she passed. Inside her office, a framed photograph sat beside her computer. Daniel Carter in his Yankees cap. Walter Harrison on his porch. Two men who had never met. Two men who had taught her the same lesson. She sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had stayed silent that morning. Richard would probably have ridden upstairs. Walter would have brushed off the humiliation. Ethan might never have discovered how afraid some employees had become. Madison might never have submitted her recording. Dozens of complaints might have remained hidden. Thousands of employees might have continued believing silence was safer. Her own life might have followed a completely different road. But she had learned not to think of courage as something enormous. That was another mistake people made. Courage usually arrived disguised as a small decision. Say something. Stay silent. Step forward. Look away. Hold the elevator. Let it close. Help the stranger. Protect yourself. Most defining moments did not announce themselves. They simply asked a question, and then waited for an answer. Emily sat behind her desk. Her assistant appeared at the doorway. "Your 9 o'clock interview is here. For the analyst position." "Yes." Emily nodded. "Send her in." A nervous young woman entered wearing an inexpensive blazer and carrying a worn folder. She looked around the large office. Emily immediately recognized the expression. Fear mixed with hope. The same expression Emily herself had carried into Harrison Global years earlier. "Good morning," Emily said. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. Please call me Emily." The applicant sat carefully. "I'm sorry if I seem nervous." "That's okay." Emily opened the resume. Community college. Part-time jobs. Strong grades. No prestigious internships. No powerful recommendations. No famous family name. Emily smiled. "Tell me about yourself." The young woman began. And somewhere beyond the glass walls, elevators continued rising and falling through the building. Carrying executives, assistants, janitors, engineers, visitors, people whose names mattered to Wall Street, people whose names nobody outside their families would ever know. The elevators did not know the difference. Walter Harrison had spent one ordinary morning trying to teach everyone else not to know it either. And in the end, the greatest inheritance he left his billionaire son had nothing to do with money. It was a standard, a question, a way of seeing people, one that had traveled from an old repairman to his son, to a frightened young employee, to an entire company. And finally, to people who would never know where the lesson began. All because one morning, when everyone else looked away, a kind girl looked at an old man and decided his dignity mattered. Before she knew his surname, before she knew his wealth, before she knew his son, before she knew anyone was watching. And that was exactly why her kindness mattered. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, remember its message. Never wait to discover someone's wealth, title, family, or influence before deciding they deserve respect. The person wearing old clothes may be important, or they may be known by nobody at all, and either way, their dignity is exactly the same. If you believe kindness should be given without checking someone's status first, and that courage means standing against humiliation, even when staying silent would be easier, kindly subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more powerful and meaningful stories like this. And in the comments, tell us, if you had been standing in that elevator lobby that morning, would you have stepped forward like Emily, even if you believed doing so could cost you your job?